Hello, Philippines. To the World News Jam here on DCRJ and RJ TV. My name is Eric Lecain, and I'm joined as always with Miss Lolly Tolentino. How are you, love?
Eric, there I am. Hello, everyone.
Where are you, Lolly Tolentino? Oh, you're right there. So Lolly, it's been an interesting week going on around the world. And as you know, Lolly Tolentino, here on DCRJ and RJ TV, we talk about the most interesting stories that happened around the world this week. And one of the things I wanted to start out first was the Asian Games. We're trying to update the story from last week. Last week we were talking about the opening of the Asian Games, and this week the Philippines, they're in it now. Now, last week, I was making a big deal about the women's football team.
Yeah.
And because, they were doing pretty good for a little while. Although this week they lost to Japan.
Yeah.
They lost. They lost 8-1, I believe, to Japan. So, Japan is one of the premier teams in the world. So, but they did pretty well going up to that point. The basketball team, which we were also talking about, lost to Jordan 87-62, which I know that's a harsh one for a lot, because this was their big redemption Asia Games. But the big story is our guy,
yes,
𝗡𝗲𝘄𝘀.
Yeah, he was the first one who got a gold medal.
He got a gold medal, leaping over a 5.9 millimeter time for a meter pole to break the Asia Games record.
Yeah.
And gave the Philippines its first gold in pole vault. And according to what I understand, this is breaks the 3-decade drought in athletics for the Asia Games for the Philippines.
Wow. You know all the story, Eric.
I know. Because
you're a sports guy. So.
Well, I've been following this guy, EJ, as you know, for years now. We've talked about him, all his trials and tribulations that he's gone through with, competing in Europe, and the problems that he had with the POC here, and all the legal issues that he had. And it's just, it's really great to see him plateau at the Asia Games, of all places, to plateau at the Asia Games with a gold medal.
Yes. It's like a revenge. It's a good revenge.
It's a good revenge, because anything else wouldn't have been. Silver, bronze would have been great. We would have applauded, but gold. The fact that he went in and got the gold medal after all that he has been through, I just think it's quite an accomplishment.
Of course, yeah. Congratulations, 𝗡𝗲𝘄𝘀.
So good thing going for EJ. I did notice that we are wearing the same T-shirt today.
Oh yeah.
We are both wearing a black T-shirt.
Well, Eric, you didn't tell me that you're going to wear black today, so,
I thought maybe that you were wearing black because the same reason I'm wearing black, although I don't have one of the shirts, but one of the biggest selling T-shirts ever, especially in the music business, was Who Killed Tupac?
Oh, yeah.
And there used to be these black shirts.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to get one. Who Killed Tupac? Now, in case you don't know who Tupac Shakur is, he was one of the greatest rappers of our time. And, back in 1996, he was at the Mike Tyson fight. Of course, we all know Mike Tyson. All the biggest stars were there, because that's back when Mike Tyson was fighting. That was the premier ticket to get. A lot of people weren't even fight fans. It was just to be there, to go, to be seen. So he's one of those guys. And so he was there. Now, Tupac, of course, being one of the biggest selling rappers of all time, very, very famous guy. And he sang, if you've ever listened to Tupac Shakur, he sang about being in a gang and gang violence and police brutality. But what sort of set him apart from other rappers or rapper gang wannabe guys was that part of, I think, his appeal was that he was what he sang about. He was the real deal. He was in a gang. And, he was part of the whole thing. He was always getting in trouble with the law because, so when the fight was over, in case you don't know the story, Tupac and the president of Death Row Records, Suge Knight, who was also this pretty hardcore guy, weighed like 350 pounds or something. They were driving to the after party after the fight, but just before that, they had attacked a guy, a rival gang member, right there in the MGM Grand Hotel where the fight was. And it was all recorded on CCTV camera, so we watched it over and over and over when it happened. And the story goes that Trayvon Lane, who was with the MOB Pirates gang, along with Suge and Tupac, spotted Orlando Anderson, who was also known as Baby Lane, who was part of the Crips gang, in the lobby of the hotel after the fight. And just a few months before, so you know the story, Baby Lane and a bunch of his Crips tried to rob Trayvon Lane at the Foot Locker. So the guy Trayvon told Tupac, hey, there's the dude that attacked me. So Tupac went up and punched the guy in the face. And Tupac and Suge, all their groups, they got together and they punched and they kicked this guy right there in the MGM Grand lobby. You know, until security came in and they got left. Then seeing Tupac and Suge, they got in their car and they drove away. The police actually stopped them a short distance away, but not for the fight, for playing their music too loud and driving without a license tag in the back of the car. So anyway, they let them go. And a few minutes later, they stopped at a traffic light, and a vehicle pulled up on the left side of the car where Tupac was sitting. And these two girls were inside, and so Tupac did what he does. He starts talking to the girls, saying, hey, you want to go to this party with us? And then right after that, another vehicle pulled up on the right side. Now, they're still sitting at the light, and they rolled down their window, except they pulled out a gun and started shooting. And so they shot into the car, and they hit Tupac 4 times. Suge Knight actually was miraculously not very badly injured, even though he was right next to the gunman. Anyway, they drove a mile after the shooting, where they were pulled over by a police gang, and the police called the paramedics, and they came and took Tupac to the hospital, in which when they were taking him into the hospital, he looked up and said, I'm dying. 6 days later, Tupac Shakur died at age 25. So the big deal about all this is many people witnessed this shooting. I mean, think about it. They're in the middle of Las Vegas just after a Tyson fight, gunshots flying. People were everywhere. Even Tupac's, his entourage was right behind them. Yet no one would give any information to the police or help the investigation in any way, including Tupac, who was awake, and Suge Knight, who saw the shooters. I mean, they were sitting in the car right next to him. They refused to give any information to the police. And then an article came out in 2002, several years later. The article was called, Who Killed Tupac Shakur? And all along, they knew who killed Tupac.
All right.
No, they all knew who the guy was. It was the guy he beat up in the lobby.
Yeah, okay. But, all right, so nobody want to testify?
Nobody.
Nobody, all right. Why is that so?
Okay, the gangs, they don't talk about it.
All right.
You know, there's two gangs, rival gangs, against each other. Supposedly that's the way it goes down. So, the way the investigators, you know, they knew who it was all this time. They just couldn't prove it because nobody would ID them. However, multiple decades goes by, and this guy, whose name is 𝗡𝗲𝘄𝘀, Dwayne Davis is his real name, he was the guy supposedly in the front seat of the car that handed the gun to the guy in the back seat of the car. There were 4 guys in the car. Now, many people saw this guy and the 3 other guys in the car. Of course, now, they couldn't make any arrests for this long time. But this guy, 𝗡𝗲𝘄𝘀, he's the only one alive in the car. The other guy, the guy that was beat up, he got killed like a couple years later. Another guy got killed another time. These guys, they don't live that long. And so this guy is the only guy that survived in the car. But he couldn't keep his mouth shut. So he wanted to do interviews, and he's like, I was the guy in the car. I know who shot. I was there. So eventually, the police are like, this guy keeps saying he's the one that was in the car. So this week, they arrested him.
Because they found him, he is the killer.
Well, they don't know yet if he was the killer. He says that he was not the killer. He was the guy that gave the gun to the guy who was the killer, who was, they believe, is the guy that got beat up at the MGM. He's the guy that actually pulled the trigger. But the guy who was in the front seat, 𝗡𝗲𝘄𝘀, he's the guy that handed him the gun.
All right, but in that, as far as I understand, that's about 27 years ago, right?
Yes.
27 years ago, and now the case is like, kind of open. They caught somebody, and now you're saying that they're not even sure yet if he's the one who pulled the gun.
Well, yeah, I mean,
killed?
they don't actually. I don't think they believe he's the one that pulled the gun, but he will go down for murder because he was part of the group
Accessory.
that killed. He's the guy that handed him the gun.
Okay.
It's funny. This story has gone through so many different levels, so many different conspiracies. I mean, supposedly, Notorious B.I.G., who is another rapper who was killed 6 months later. Supposedly, he's the one that put up $1 million to have Tupac killed. But there was all these conspiracy theories. But it turns out the way that it was, the way that they explained it this week is that it was kind of just by circumstance that these guys had left the MGM and they went to the liquor store to pick up some booze before they went to somebody. And they were coming out of the liquor store. They saw the Tupac entourage, like driving by. So they got in the car and they went up and they said there was no big conspiracy, no big plan. Anyway, that's what they're saying. It just happened to be when they were coming out of the liquor store, they spotted them. And then they drove up next to them and decided to shoot them.
That's a problem sometimes when you are an artist, you're a famous rapper, whatever. Sometimes their ego, their pride is so big, and yet they're so proud of themselves, and to the point that there's a lot of people, want to hang out with them, and to the point that they get jealousy. I don't know. There's a lot of things that's happening, especially if you are an artist.
What's interesting about Tupac Shakur, because this has been one of the biggest questions in rapper history. Who killed Tupac? And one of the things that we've learned about Tupac is that he was a little different than the other rappers that we see today. He carried a gun. He sold drugs. I mean, he didn't need to be. He was rich. He was one of the biggest selling rappers in history, yet he chose to be part of this life. He chose to have this life. And he was shot before. He was shot before. He showed up to his rape trial in a thing on his bandage on his head with his arm in a sling from being shot before. So, I mean, this guy, in the few years that he was a famous rapper, he was only 25. So, I just see that, it's glad that they're able to put this to rest, especially because this guy that they caught is old now. He's an old man.
Yeah, he's an old man.
They showed a picture of him. He's an old gray man, and all the rest of them are all dead. So he's the only one left to.
But the sad part of that, something like this, that guy who got caught. I mean, now it happened to him when he's already old. Isn't that sad? They did not catch him when he was still younger. 27 years after, he's already old.
Yeah, and the reason they caught him is he couldn't keep his mouth shut.
Well, that's a problem. He keeps on talking.
He keeps talking about it to the media.
Maybe he's so proud of, I was with the guy.
I was one of the guys.
Yeah, one of the guys. So,
and the police are like, oh, you were? Okay.
Okay.
So all they needed was some witnesses, and they finally got whatever they needed. And just this past week, they arrested him. So he can't, on a murder case like this, he will probably spend some time in jail, but leading up to his trial. And the trial will be big. I think it'll be a big trial. So let's just wait and see what happens. Okay. But speaking of other things that are on trial, last week we talked about the U.S. government shutdown.
Oh, yes.
And I remember we were saying, will the U.S. government shut down? And I was thinking that it would. And well, at the last minute, on the last day, Congress pulled out a squeaker.
Yeah.
Literally 3 hours before the U.S. government was going to shut down at the end of the week. It looked like it was inevitable. In fact, I went to bed last night, for sure, going to be talking about how the U.S. government shut down and what was going to happen now. And anyway, I woke up this morning and they finally came around.
Which is good.
They came up with an agreement. Basically, no longer further embarrass the Republicans or embarrass Kevin McCarthy. But they passed a bill. What the bill does, really, it adds time. Because they're going to have the same problem November 17th. All they did was extend it.
Yeah.
They did not come up with a clear-cut budget. It's just, and they didn't actually agree on anything very much. The cuts that the Republicans want to do is never going to happen. The Biden administration is never going to do those cuts because they spent their whole administration is based on these programs for the poor people and all these different things that they have done. And so the Republicans are never going to get their way with that. They had 10 months to figure this out, and they didn't. And I think they didn't on purpose.
Well, that's how I figured it out. They did it on purpose because you know what? They don't want this administration to succeed.
That's exactly true. They don't want the Biden administration to succeed. However, this time it backfired on them.
Oh yeah, of course. You know what? I don't just understand why the politicians, especially now the Republican in the U.S., why are they not? Isn't it that they run? They run in to get power, so they can help people and making the whatever. So and now what they're trying to do is to oppose the government, all the things that they do, especially if you're a Republican. I see that all the time, and I said, well, you know what? The good thing, Eric, that I saw about Kevin McCarthy, I really don't know the guy, but when he said something like, that I am there should be an adult to stand here because he has like kids, right?
Children in the playground all fighting each other.
Yeah, I'm just like, oh my God, which is what he did was the right thing, and that's what I am. I always admire people who stood, in front of everyone that I have to do the right thing for the good of our country.
Well,
That's why you're there, right?
I mean, unfortunately, it may be the end of Kevin McCarthy.
Well, you know what? Good luck. I mean, tough luck. But, that's how it is. It's politics. That's how
he made a deal with these crazies so he could be Speaker of the House, and now he let these crazies, do all this stuff.
Yeah, but...
And now they're like, well, we're going to throw you out now because you didn't do what we said. And, one of the things that they're talking about, Lolly, is the Ukraine.
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to call them the crazies, but that's what they call them. That's what they've come to known as the crazies. And they want to cut all the funding to the Ukraine, and basically they want to hand Russia a win.
Yeah, that's what everyone is saying. You know what? That's already a signal for the Russian to take over and to do more to other countries, whatever they wish to do. Right?
I mean, these are what they call the Trumpers, because of Trump. He's buddies with Vladimir Putin.
Of course.
And of course he wants Putin to come out on
BFF.
top, so he can build a hotel in Russia.
Oh, yeah, of
allegedly. But there's enough Republicans still that are slightly normal, very much against this idea.
Slightly normal.
And President Biden, he came out after he signed the bill at 3 hours before the United States the government was about to shut down. He signed and he called the shutdown an unnecessary crisis that would have inflicted needless pain on millions of hardworking Americans. He went on to say, but I want to be clear, we should never have been in this position in the first place. Just a few months ago, Speaker McCarthy and I reached a budget agreement to avoid precisely this type of manufactured crisis. For weeks, extreme House Republicans, these are the Trumpers, tried to walk away from that deal by demanding drastic cuts that would have been devastating for millions of Americans, and they failed.
Yeah. Well, if you're doing the right thing, I believe it will always succeed. But, if you are always thinking of you want to hostile or to harass your leader. I don't know how to explain it, Eric, but you know what? I feel so bad that what if, McCarthy did not stand firm on, whatever he believes in and whatever he thinks is right. So what will happen to Americans? I mean,
we'll find out November 17th when we have to do this all over again.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised again.
I would not be surprised at all if this whole thing just happens again.
Yeah, I mean, they want all the drama.
Another month. Yeah, they just want to get on YouTube. They just want to get their 15 seconds on YouTube.
Oh my God!
I believe, honestly, that sounds like a joke.
Yeah,
but it's kind of not. A lot of these people that are in the Congress in the United States. First thing, honestly, and here again, this is kind of an opinion, which we try to not do a lot of opinions. Some of these people in Congress in the United States should not be there. And I'm not the only person saying this.
Yeah.
That, there's a certain amount of intelligence and decorum that you need to have in order to be in the U.S. Congress. And some of them, I have to say, I think they're there just to burn the house down. They could care less about
I know, right?
what's going to happen to the United States.
It's a different politics now. Unlike before, I mean, I always look up to America. I said this again and again, because I respect them so much on the things that they do for Americans. But when the former president became president, the whole thing changed.
Yeah, things have changed a lot. I mean, we've had government shutdowns before, but the government shutdowns we have had before in the United States have been based on policy. And here's where everybody's going, what's what Biden called it, an unnecessary crisis. What is this shutdown based on? And part of what it's based on is they want to do an impeachment of the president, and they're saying, well, if you don't impeach him, then we won't sign off on this budget.
What a deal.
If you won't pull out of the Ukraine, we won't sign on this budget. Things that we are going to be very difficult for them to do. And I think this is one of those things that if the United States were to pull out of the Ukraine now, I think that would be disastrous. For the world.
Yeah.
I mean, there's enough problems going on, and we'll get to that a little later. We're going to talk about it a little later. But this, the rainstorm was averted. Unlike the rainstorm that I had to avert last Wednesday here in the Philippines, where I could not get home because my condo was completely surrounded by a lake.
You were surrounded by a lake.
I could not get to my condo because there was a lake around my condo.
You should just swim, Eric.
I could not get through. But speaking of lakes around your condo, more rain fell in a single day in New York City than any other time since 1948.
Wow, 1948.
New York City, on Friday, this past Friday, Brooklyn, New York, more rain fell in 3 hours than usually falls in an entire month. Records were broken for most rain, speed of rain, and flooding.
Wow.
All broken in New York City. These massive drainage pipes that they have in New York City, which, by the way, I've seen a New York City drainage pipe. You can walk through it. You can, me, 6 feet tall, I can walk through a New York City drainage pipe. Those things were overwhelmed in the city. And the water just backed up. And basements, schools. But the issue was subways. 90% of the population moves around the city of New York in a subway, which is an underground tube with a train that runs on electricity.
Oh my God, that's scary. Did they stop? They stopped the operation.
They had to shut down almost all operations on the subway because the tunnels became flooded. And people are asking, they were asking, why is New York City, the richest city in the world, not ready for flooding? And it's because this wasn't normal. New York City is ready for floods. They have floods all the time, but they were not ready for this. This was like a Noah's Ark kind of flood.
Well, you know what? People are asking that question, why? I mean, it's happening around the world. Around the world.
Why? Where would you be going with this, Lolly Tolentino?
It's a climate change.
Okay. A lot of experts are blaming this massive storm in New York on climate change. So, I mean, and it's interesting because they said that the reason that because this rain, I looked at the videos. I mean, this was ridiculous rain, like rain I've never seen. I mean, when you see cars driving with the water up to the window, that, is a pretty, on a bridge, I mean, that's a pretty bad flood. And what they were saying is the warmer atmosphere was acting like a massive sponge, and it sopped up all the water vapor, and then what it did was it just squeezed it all in one shot, one spurt, and all the water just came out of that sponge all at once. And the governor called a state of emergency for New York, Long Island, the Hudson Valley. They urged people, do not leave your house because this is what they call a life-threatening event. And of course, you know, it shows commuters that were stranded in their cars. You know, they're having to get up, you know, get out of the car, and it was just incredible. It was, but like you said, you know, this is not just happening in New York. Every week, it seems like we are talking about some ridiculous, life-threatening flood.
Yeah, and you know, some countries are not even in the news yet, but you know what? It's happening all over, and it's really scary, Eric. I mean, you know, if you get scared going to your condo because there's a lake, I mean, how much more some places that are, you know, gets really flooded. I mean, flash flood especially is the one that's really scary.
I mean, the interesting thing is, I mean, in Manila, yeah, it floods here all the time, but we're right next to the ocean. For some reason, the floodwaters seem to get a certain height, and they don't really get much higher.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like those pictures in New York, where the floodwaters were, you know, 4 feet deep. Now, I have seen that once in Manila. There was one flood a couple of years ago, where I remember I had to walk, and the water was like up to here. On Mabini Street, you know, it was in, you know, on a major street.
Yeah, I think I remember that time.
That was some big giant
There was
flood.
a typhoon, I think.
Yeah, some huge typhoon, and we went outside, and actually the sun was shining, but the water level was up to here. So, but the thing is that now we're seeing these massive floods all around the world, and I think what makes it different is we're starting to see people dying because of these floods, because of these massive mudslides, like the things that happen in Hong Kong. And you're starting to see the numbers of deaths rising very, very quickly. And that's how you can really tell how bad a flood is.
Yeah, wow.
So one thing that was interesting about this flood in New York, someone took advantage of the flood in New York. You know, there is a zoo in Central Park in the city, and it flooded. And it gave a chance for Sally the sea lion, to make an escape. So the floodwaters came all the way up to the sea lion pool and over-flooded the sea lion pool, and the sea lion was able to get out. And so the sea lion got out and walked around, and walked around Central Park for a while. She looked around, saw what she could see, and like, all right, I've had enough of this, and turned around and walked back and got back in the pool.
Isn't it? That's a good story.
She actually supposedly walked quite a distance away, and then decided, okay, I've seen enough, and then turned around and found her way back. Waddled back to the pool, and got inside the pool.
That's a cute story.
So anyway. Continuing on with crazy stuff that's going on in the United States, speaking of floods, the Republican debate. Remember we talked about the Republican debate, I think it was weeks ago, like maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago we talked about it, but there was no Trump. No Trump showed up. So, you know, we talked about what they talked about. But there was another debate that was coming up for the nominee for president. So the question I wanted to ask this week was, when is it? And the answer is, it was last week. But nobody watched it. Nobody watched it.
Nobody, you know.
I mean, the Republican debate for president, you would think would be one of the most important things to watch.
Yeah, people said, all right, okay.
Because there's no Trump.
Yeah.
Trump is the front leader. He's like 50 points ahead of everybody else. And so anyway, he decided not to show up. Not many people watched it or even remembered that it was happening. I think they got around 9 million viewership, which is not very much. But the interesting thing, I of course watched the debate. I'm just making all this up, being silly. But I of course watched the debate. But the interesting thing I thought about the debate, just to get through this, you know, Republicans, for the most part, they come on these things, they want to try and get their one-liners in, and they had people from Fox asking them questions, and in general, Fox is the one that Republicans go to. They don't like to go to CNN, they don't like to go to MSNBC or NBC, they want to go to Fox, because what does Fox do? They give them those easy questions that they know is going to make them look good, and so they had a journalist there from Univision who was just part of Fox, and they asked like questions like, the Florida's new curriculum for schools, in which they say many black people benefited from slavery because they learned skills from working for their masters. And so the Republicans are like, oh no, how do we answer this? How do we answer this question? And she was like, slaves who got paid nothing and would get whipped and sometimes hung by their necks. So this was a good thing. So, and then she asked another question too, which was great. She said, violent crimes are up very high against the LGBT community. What are you guys going to do to make sure that that community is going to be safe? Of course, Republicans don't want to answer this question because, they're not really for that.
Yeah.
So a lot of them complained about that questions. So, but of course you're going to need to answer those questions. But, there was some, but the interesting thing about this debate, if there was anything interesting about this debate at all, I watched it. It was actually, honestly, it was a big snooze fest. It was kind of boring. But the big thing was they didn't talk about Donald Trump. I thought that that's what they would be talking about the whole time. He's the guy that's 50 points ahead of all of them. But they didn't want to talk about him.
Because they belong to the same party. And then what if Trump will be the one?
I know.
Yeah.
What if he wins?
Yeah, otherwise you will be, you know what will happen. You know how Trump is. The next thing you know, you open your Twitter.
I know. Right now, on the same night as the debate, he was off in talking to these people that are supposedly going to be on strike. Supposedly, the people that Trump had in his audience were not even people that were part of the union, that they just brought in people so he could have an audience. Who knows if any of this is true. But, at one point in the debate, Chris Christie called Donald Trump Donald Duck.
Yeah.
All right, that was pretty good. Give it to Don. And he said that Donald Trump not only divided the country, but he divided families. All right, I can't disagree with that.
Okay.
But at the end, it was just each candidate trying to, land a knockout blow in a very boring fight.
Yeah, it's kind of boring, a debate already. So maybe people don't really watch the debate. So
anyway,
maybe they will just wait for the time that whoever will be their
their nominee, which
nominee.
will be Donald Trump. You heard it here on DZRJ and RJTV. We're telling you it's going to be Donald Trump. I don't think any of these other guys even stand a chance of beating him for the nominee. And, like I said, he will be the nominee for president. And a lot of people said, right now, if you look at the polls, he actually might be ahead in some polls for the presidency. And we will get to this a little later, but we did give our 5 minutes to the debate. I did want to get to one other piece of news, which I know is going to be kind of a little bit of a weird piece, but I think it's very important to talk about. And it's going to be hard for a lot of people in the world, especially in Europe, to swallow, because as we know, NATO is united against Russia in the war with Ukraine. We have spoken about this. And in NATO, every vote is needed to make sure that they are, that one day, maybe the Ukraine would become a member of NATO, as did Sweden. And Finland, whoever, I can't remember, there's a couple of new members part of the NATO. But this week, there was a thorn that was injected into NATO's shoe there because the election just ended in Slovakia. And as you know, Slovakia is a member of NATO. And the winner, which was a big surprise, I like to say no big surprise, but it was a big surprise, was a guy named Robert Fico, who, I don't know anybody out there that would know who this guy is. I don't even know who this guy is, but it turns out he is a massive supporter of Putin. And it looks like he's going to be the new prime minister. He's not the prime minister yet because he did not get enough votes. It's interesting how the rules go in Slovakia, but he didn't get enough votes to clearly come out as the prime minister, so they'll have to try to build up a coalition in the parliament to make sure that he is the next prime minister, which is going to be messy anyway. But one of the reasons is that he finally becoming, the leader of the government. The first order of business that he says that he's going to do is pull out all support for Ukraine. And he has vowed to block the Ukraine from ever being a member of NATO.
Oh my God! So that will be there's already a problem.
That's a problem. You know why this is a problem, Lolly, is because, Slovakia is a member not only of NATO, but a member of the EU. And they have always been a huge supporter of the Ukraine. And they have donated a large amount of military hardware to that country. But the new guy is really the polar opposite. And he blames the Nazis and the fascists in Ukraine of provoking Putin to have this war. So this is how far on the polar opposite this guy is.
Well.
And and it turns out he's also a close supporter of this other guy we spoke about on the show, the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, who is clearly the biggest troublemaker right now in the EU. And so, when if this guy becomes in power and he teams up with the Prime Minister of Hungary, that's going to make a very powerful bloc to fight everything that goes on in the EU and NATO.
Okay, if that happens, Eric, you know what? There will be, I'm looking at there will be no peace. Instead of creating or making friends with different country, if there's somebody who is like that, who has that kind of thinking and plans on what to do if they become, if they're already in power. So
yeah, the Liberal Party that was there in Slovakia before, which actually I have spoke about on the show for another reason, but they wanted to have closer ties with the West. They've been moving closer and closer to being, part of the trade with the West, and that's why they became part of the EU. And now this guy is going to come in and completely turn around everything that they have done over this time. And it's funny, this guy was also the prime minister before, years and years before, but he was thrown out because supposedly he had 2 journalists killed, assassinated, who were investigating him. But like I said, it's interesting. And people always, one of the questions that was asked when this thing happened is, how could this happen? And a lot of it, they were not ready for the massive onslaught of Russian propaganda that came through Facebook in Slovakia. They just blasted Slovakia with all kinds of social media stuff and got a lot of people there to believe that, only 40% of the Slovakian people believe that it's Russia's fault for the war. That means 60% believe that it's the Ukraine's fault or the United States' fault. 50% believe that the United States is a security threat to Slovakia.
Oh, well.
Because of all this Facebook.
Well, all the propaganda.
Yeah.
When I just don't know, why do they believe that right away? Why don't they just check first? Is it the reliable source? Is it true? I don't know.
I don't know. If they were able to get, the United States to believe in this, Slovakia, I guess every country needs to go through this and, realize, hey, you know what? We can be manipulated by a social media platform.
Yeah. That's the thing now. Everybody, that can make or break you. Social media can make or break you.
It's true. It can decide who's going to be a president. And you know what? Elections matter.
Oh, yeah, a lot. It matters a lot to a lot of people.
We think this tiny little country, Slovakia, well, this is going to mean a lot in the future because that guy vows to block any chance Ukraine ever has of joining NATO. And so when they team up with Hungary, which is a much better country, before Hungary was all by themselves, and now, they're both going to be together on this if this guy finally does win it. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up and get that story out of the way, as well as, every week I wanted to do some animal news because we stopped doing animal news before, and there was one great story that happened this week. September 30th to October 6th in Australia is National Boat Safety Week. It's to educate people in Australia and New Zealand about boat safety, especially wearing your life jacket. So on the first day of Boat Safety Week, 2 men were out in a boat when a whale jumped in their boat.
The whale jumped on the boat.
The whale jumped in their boat. Now, it's unclear how big the whale was. However, even the smallest whales, when they jump in your boat's going down.
Definitely.
So their boat was destroyed. It was sunk.
Poor.
The men went into the water. One of them died. One of them was hospitalized. They were believed to not be wearing their life jackets on the first
my
day of
goodness.
National Boat Safety Week.
Well, that's the thing. You know, that is your National Safety Week, and you're not wearing your life jacket.
You need to wear
it's
your
your fault.
life jacket. And they put out a warning, please stay 100 meters away from whales and 300 meters away from whale mothers with calves.
Oh, we better not, Eric. So don't get closer to the whale.
Yeah, so.
Or the whale will eat you.
And one more piece of animal news, which this one's hard to swallow.
Which one?
You know, Paris is known for what? High fashion, museums,
Yeah.
very stuck-up people. I don't know. However, it's known for something else right now. Bed bugs.
What is bed bugs?
Bed bugs are these tiny little insects. You cannot see them, and they hide in your bed. And when you sleep at night, they come out and they bite you.
Oh, okay.
And they make little red dots all over you.
Oh.
So anyway, right now in Paris, there is a widespread epidemic of bed bugs.
Oh my God.
They are not just being found in people's beds, which is the usual spot to find bed bugs. They're being found in the seats in cinemas, public transportation seats. They're finding these things all over the city. And the deputy mayor of Paris said, you have to understand that in reality, in Paris right now, no one is safe from bed bugs.
Oh my God.
They are a risk. He said it's a reality right now. You can catch bed bugs anywhere, and you can bring them to your house.
Oh, what if you go there, Eric, and then when you come back here, you have that in your...
We have. I mean,
Oh
I'm
my
sure they
God.
have bed bugs in the Philippines too, but I mean, this is an epidemic, and it turns
Yeah.
out this didn't just start. This has been going on for 3 years. 3 years ago, the government started a campaign to try and get hold of the bed bug problem, and it is just exploding, and they don't know what to do. Experts are saying this is a phenomenon, a nature's phenomenon, that people pick it up in a train, and they transfer it to a hotel bed, and then somebody transfers it to somewhere else, and then before you know it, it's in people's homes. And you know, it's just all over the place. And what they're worried about is the Olympic Games is coming to Paris.
Oh, wow. But the thing is, you know, if it is ongoing already for 3 years, how come they cannot even think or, you know, find the solution to kill the bed bugs?
And here's why. It's good that
Why?
you brought that up. They said that these bed bugs have been becoming resistant to the insecticides that they use. So they've been using these very specialized insecticides, and the bed bugs are just building up an immunity to them.
Wow.
And so now they got to think of a different way to kill them.
Well, they really need to find a way to kill, or maybe just had burned them. But if that's a problem. If it's your bed, you're
Let's
gonna
burn down Paris. That
Yeah,
doesn't
but-
remind us of World War II, does it? Not the Germans, it's the bed bugs.
The bed
we
bug,
need to
yeah,
burn
yeah.
down Paris to get rid of the bed bugs.
Anyway.
But anyway, so that was a interesting story there in the animal kingdom. Now, going over to entertainment news, I did want to talk about this because Steven Tyler, who we all know as the lead singer of Aerosmith, and he's also on that show, America's Got Talent. He's 75 years old. He's one of these old rocker guys. He just keeps rocking. He just keeps going, just keeps playing, tries to keep touring. However, he has a tour coming up, but he is going to have to cancel his tour because he fractured his larynx.
Wow, vocal cord.
Yeah, the larynx in your throat
Is
that
it
holds the vocal cords.
Oh, wow.
So the whole rest of the 2023 tour has to be postponed. In a statement, he said, "I'm brokenhearted not to be out there with Aerosmith and my brothers from the Black Crowes, who were supposed to be opening for them, rocking the best fans in the world. Promise to be back as soon as I can." They said he's going to be out. He did a show, and his throat started bleeding, and so they said, this concert tour was supposed to mark the 50 years of the band being together, and you know what? It's coming to an end. I mean, how long can some of these guys go? I mean, Tyler's not the oldest one, and he's 75. And of course, the big question everybody says, how can you fracture your larynx?
Yeah, exactly. There must be something you did.
By
I mean,
singing.
Why? Okay, singing is one, but there must be something else.
I mean, usually you
because-
fracture your larynx in a car accident or a gunshot. It's usually, and they have to repair it. They have to put your neck in one of these things, or these block things, whatever, to keep your larynx from moving. But here, he fractured his larynx from screaming.
Well, you know that maybe I don't know. When did he start screaming? Since he was a kid?
I mean, you know, this band's been around for 50 years.
Well, 50 years. So you've been, you know, you've been
Walk this way.
and you know, I don't know. And plus, of all the things that he eat or drink,
Yeah,
maybe
I mean,
drugs, you know,
You know-
anything.
You know, it's funny. It's a funny thing about Aerosmith. I actually saw Aerosmith. I don't know how many years, 10 years ago, and I remember reading an article because Aerosmith, they were known as one of the biggest partying bands ever. They were all heroin addicts. He was a heroin addict. He would shoot up heroin right before he would go on stage. He almost passed out on stage a whole bunch of times. But later in life, he became, when he'd go to a hotel, instead of looking for the local drug dealer, he would look for the local gym. He became very, because he almost died a couple times. So, I think they were trying to take care of himself, and they realized, at one point that they are, not just a band. They're a billion-dollar corporation, and so I think he was trying to get himself together. But now he has fractured his larynx, and at age 75,
Wow.
I don't
Well,
know,
Eric, if you're 75, you better stop. I
think
mean,
it's about- I think it's
just
about time.
relax.
I mean, speaking about bands that need to stop touring, the Rolling Stones was in the news this week because the lead singer Mick Jagger. Look at Mick Jagger. He's like 150 years old now. How old is that guy?
I don't
Anyway,
know. Must be really that old.
He won't die, and they won't stop touring. But they're releasing an album. First album in 18 years. The Stones are like super multi-millionaires now. They've sold so many albums. But even though music is basically free now because it's on the internet, but he's worth like $500 million. He announced this week, I'm worth $500 million, and I'm probably going to die soon. I'm not going to leave any of it to my kids. My kids are spoiled brats. I'm going to leave it to somebody else. I'm going to leave it to the sea lions of New York City Zoo.
Okay, but then just like Jackie Chan. Remember, he said that he's not going to leave anything to his kids because he has to make their own money, something like that. So same thing, same thing. So, Eric, if you are that rich, I mean, are you not really going to leave something for your kids?
I'm sure his kids are rich. His kids, they range in from ages 6 to 52. So that is the age range of his kids. So some of his kids are rich already. I mean, his kids that are in the 50s, I'm sure they have a lot of money. So he
just want to donate it.
He just wants to donate his money to charity.
Eric, why don't let's meet up with him and tell him that we need some money here in the Philippines. Maybe he can donate to our project.
Come on, Mick, just $10 million. What's $10 million?
Nah.
Anyway, speaking of millions of dollars, Lolly, getting over here to fashion news. We haven't done any fashion news in a while. We all know one of the most people watched in fashion, in history, in our lifetime was Princess Diana.
Of course, everybody's idol and favorite.
Big stories. Every time she wears something, there's a story behind it.
Yes.
Wedding dress, the black velvet cocktail dress, which was known as the revenge dress. All these things. Anyway, everything she wore, it was such a big part of her legacy. And one of those items that she wore went up for auction this week, and it was the highest price ever paid for one of her outfits. It was not a lavish gown. It was not a dress. It was a sweater. And honestly, a pretty freaking ugly sweater, I must say. It was a sweater with sheep on it, white sheep on it, and in one of the sheep was black. So it was called the Black Sheep Sweater. And she wore it in 1981 to a polo match. They took a picture of it. And this is when she was engaged to Prince Charles. The bidding started at $190,000 US, and it jumped to $1,143,000 for a sweater.
For a sweater
with sheep on it.
With what, Eric? For the $1.1 million, you can already put up a factory of a sweater.
Factory makes sweaters with sheep on it. Anyway, it's now the record holder, the most money ever paid for a sweater in history. They actually thought that the sweater might be around $50,000 to $80,000, and it went for $1.1 million. And just so you know, Marilyn Monroe, she wore that white dress in that movie.
Oh, yeah.
With the movie where she walked across the subway
Yeah,
thing and
with
it
the
blew up
nice
like this.
thing, yeah,
A 7-Year Itch, that was the name of that movie. That sold at auction this year for, you ready? $5.5 million.
My goodness. You know what? I cannot even imagine. Well, you know what? If you are really rich, what is $5 million?
$5 million.
What is $1.1 million? That's nothing. That's peanut.
Now, the Queen Mary Antoinette pendant also went on sale this year. That was, of course, Marie Antoinette's head got chopped off in the 18th century, along with her husband, King Louis. Her pendant sold for $36 million.
$36 million?
$36 million for a brooch.
Wow.
Anyway.
Can we meet up with those people who bought it?
So I was going to say, we can't meet up with Antoinette because she got her head chopped off. But speaking of things that are paid too much for something, you know, back to good old Donald Trump, you know, he was found guilty of fraud this week. Not to bring up a subject that he doesn't want me to talk about, but the civil trial coming up this week in which Trump and his business will be sued by the state of New York for $250 million. But before that, the judge this week gave a ruling, before the trial even started, that the trial will happen. Trump's lawyers tried everything they could do to stop this trial, but even some crazy, ludicrous things. But the judge was like, every time they would do some argument to stop the trial, the judge was like, what, are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. Get rid of these motions. We're not doing this. So the judge pretty much said this week, Trump, you defrauded the U.S. government. You defrauded the IRS. You even defrauded the public for years and years and years, systematically overvaluing corporate assets over so many years. The examples of these things that the judge gave were insane. One building, they claimed the actual square footage was 300% over what it was.
Wow.
You know, a building is this big of a square. You know, how can you make it? Anyway, I don't think they check these things out. One building, that, you know, they valued a rent-controlled building the same as a regular building. Now, it's complicated to explain rent control, but there's a massive pricing difference. Because a rent-controlled building means the rent can never go up. So those buildings are not worth that much. But in New York, you know, which is why once before when I lived in New York, I was paying $1,000 a month in a place that should have been $8,000 a month because it was rent controlled. So, you know, he would say his buildings were worth as much, even though they were rent controlled, he would say they were worth this much. And so he could get loans. And the judge said, Trump, you were living in a fantasy world, not the real world. So, you know, Lolly, Trump has lost multiple cases in the past. Recently, you know, there was the Trump University, the fraud there. He lost $25 million. He had to pay for the students to settle that fraud. The Trump charity that he had, they lost that for fraud because he was stealing money from his charity to put toward his political operations. Trump's company was found recently guilty of 17 counts of criminal tax fraud for falsifying business records. His CFO went to jail. Now it looks like this trial is going to go forward for $250 million.
Wow. My question, Eric, is this. Okay, with that case of Trump, I mean, it's like he overpriced. I mean, how do you, there's a word that you used earlier, you know, when you overprice everything. It's like, I mean, in terms of real estate, you overvalue. All right, he overvalued the property. Right now, I mean, if he did that a long time ago, so he's been cheating the government for so many years already. Yeah. I mean, did they not? How come they did not discover that?
Oh, they did. They've known for a while. I mean, here's what Trump would do. It's one thing if you have a property that's worth, say, $10 million, and you overvalue it $12 million. But when you have a property that's $10 million and you say it's worth $100 million, so you borrow money from the bank based on that $100 million value.
Right.
And then you don't pay the bank back. What happens? If you borrow $10 million, you're in trouble. But if you borrow $100 million on a building that's worth $10 million, now the bank's in trouble.
Of course.
And this is what he's been doing for years, and he just declares bankruptcy. You know, he's been through how many?
Yeah.
11 bankruptcies or 7? I can't remember. And you know, it's this is why it's like, wait a minute, they've been trying to get him for fraud for years, and it's just they can't get him. They keep, you know, he's got a lot of lawyers, and the way they keep appealing it, and eventually they wait till like a new group comes in, and then they just keep getting around it. This has been going on for years. You know, Trump has been in court his whole life. He's just never been, and I think the reason that he's really getting pinned down now is because he was president.
Yeah.
He was president, and you know, this kind of stuff that he's going through now. I mean, Trump's entire New York empire now could be in receivership. Receivers could basically take control of all his firms,
right,
and liquidate everything to pay this massive fine of $250 million.
Wow.
You know, and he would be banned. He and his sons would be banned from ever doing business ever in New York again for the rest of their lives.
Wow.
And there's a big issue about his Florida estate.
Yeah.
You know, Mar-a-Lago. Trump said that his Mar-a-Lago estate was worth $1.8 billion.
Okay.
Okay. So the city assessor put it at $16 million. Okay, that's a little low, I think. His own assessor put it at $17 million. I mean, it's
Okay.
probably a bit more than that, I would think now. But $1.8 billion, that's just
Oh,
absolutely
so
insane.
he really love making overpriced. We call it here overpriced, you know.
Overpriced.
Overpriced. Yeah.
Overpriced.
Overpriced, right? Yeah, because if it is only like $17 million, then he come up with $1.something billion. My goodness, I'm going to charge you with that $1.something billion, Eric.
Yeah. I mean, so there's a reason why, you know, they are coming after him hard now.
Yeah, because
you know, it's like I said before he was president. I think they tried a bunch of times, and then they just could never catch him. And now because he's president, and you know, this week was a big week for Trump. He did a lot of stuff this week. He came out and he threatened the military commander that was in charge while he was president, General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who's actually stepping down this week. But Trump came out this week and said that, you know, he deserved the death penalty.
Oh my goodness.
And everybody's like, what? Because supposedly he betrayed him when January 6th came up. He wanted the military to step in. He wanted to call martial law, but the military wouldn't do it.
Of
and
course.
so he was like, well, he should be, you know, court-martialed. And I'm like, because of this, I mean, this is you know, Trump is massively in the news this week for so many different things, and so many different things that we can't even get to all of them. I mean, I've got this massive list of all the stuff that happened this week, but you know, the main points are being. I want to see what happens on Monday when opening arguments start for this trial. And speaking of opening arguments and closing arguments, we are going to have to close the show because we are out of time. But we've had a wonderful discussion here this week, me, Eric Lecain, here, and Lali Tolentino on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. Please, everyone, join us next week here Sunday at 7 p.m. Everybody be safe out there. And for now, me and Lali will see you next week.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily